All right, everybody, we are going to talk about a new topic today. Sorry, excuse me. Get myself situated. So, basically, when we've been talking about sort of adding chromatic chords into keys, we've only looked up to this point at ways to add them in functionally, right? And so that should be pretty straightforward what I mean by functionally. When we've done secondary dominant chords, those are there as a function of pointing to another key, of sort of pushing us towards a different harmonic center. And we can extend that even farther with the work on modulation that we've done, where the chromaticisms are present to be functional, to move us to a new key. They're not just there for color, which is sort of the other way we can do it. And that's what we're actually going to start to explore now. So rather than only integrating these sort of chromatic harmonies for functional reasons, and when we say functional, we mean to lead us somewhere, to point somewhere. For a functional purpose, we're going to see and learn about a way that we can actually use chromaticism for a color-oriented way, to add in some new color to the key. And so we're going to talk about a topic that's called modal mixture, which I think has it's one of the coolest sounding things. And also modal mixture is such a fun, I don't know, it's a great term. So modal mixture, when we talk about this, the mode that's part of this, the modal part, means the parallel key. And by parallel key, right, we mean major and minor. So we can differentiate between parallel keys and relative keys, right? So if we're talking C major, right, the relative minor of C major is A minor, right? But what's the parallel minor of C major? It's C minor. So what we're going to be doing is we're borrowing chords from C minor into C major. Or we could go the other way. We could be in the key of C minor, right? And we could find a way to borrow some chords from the major key into our minor world. So that's what we're doing when we talk about modal mixture. We're mixing chords from the parallel key or the parallel mode. And you heard me use the word borrow a second ago. Another term for these is they're sometimes called borrowed chords. I tend to use the term modal mixture, but you may hear them referred to as borrowed chords as well. Now, in the most common and sort of like textbook manner, we often see that we're in the major key and we borrow chords from the minor. That's the direction this tends to go. We're going to work on doing it the opposite way, but being in major and borrowing from the minor is definitely the most common way. You certainly will recognize sort of this sound, right? That's modal mixture. Or even things that I might do that are like this, right? That's a modal mixture. We're borrowing from the minor, the parallel minor, into the major. Now, the way that makes this very different from the function-oriented chromaticisms that we've looked at, like secondary dominants or modulations or whatever, is that the new chord, the funky chord, is going to retain the same function in the phrase structure. So when we did secondary dominants, we talked a lot about how, like, well, that may look like it should be a 2 chord, but actually it's a 5 of 5. Or that may look like it's a whatever chord, but it's actually 7 of something. So when we make those chords chromatic, their function changes, right? They're pointing a different direction than we would expect them to in the key. Here, however, in modal mixture, when we borrow a chord, it's going to keep its same function. So if I'm here and I want to borrow a minor 4 chord, like that 4 chord still acts like a normal 4 chord would. For whether it's major or minor, whether it's in the major key or in the minor key, or from the major or the minor, 4 has a way that it works, and that's not changing. The same function is there, which is very different from secondary dominant and secondary leading tone chords that we were looking at last semester in particular. So that's one of the big things here when we talk about modal mixture being color oriented, right? It's that it's not changing the function of the chords. It's just changing the character. It's changing the color, right? Not changing the function of these chords. So that's one thing. It's a new sound, but the Roman numerals still describe the chords working in the same way that we always would expect them to. So let's get in here. Let's do some examples of what we're looking at here. And what we're first going to see is if we only change one accidental. If we only change one accidental, what are some ways that we can have some borrowed chords? And so this is one of the first critical things to know about borrowed chords, about modal mixture, is that there are certain scale degrees that are much more likely to be involved. And so if we think about the major scale versus the natural minor scale, right? We know that there's actually only 3 notes that are different between them, right? The 3rd scale degree, the 6th scale degree, and the 7th scale degree are the differences between major and the natural minor scale. And so if we think about it, we can sort of start to figure out which ones are more useful to us in borrowing or mixing the modes. The 7th scale degree is not super useful at all because we don't usually use the lowered 7th scale degree in minor, right? We've already adjusted the 7th scale degree to be the leading tone, right? So that one's kind of out. The 3rd scale degree, well, right? That one definitely gives a different color, but rather than being this sort of subtle new sound that we can have, if we change that one, we're more likely to just end up being in minor, because the 3rd scale degree is the one that makes the tonic chord major or minor. So we are going to see some examples of doing that, but it's fairly disruptive, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's fairly disruptive to do it that way. But if we adjust the 6th scale degree, which in major is that major 6th, in C major it's A natural, right? If I adjust that and borrow from the minor, use A flat, ooh, you see that changes the color, but not in a way that disrupts, in a way that adds, in a way that gives us this deeper, richer palette to work with. So by far, the 6th scale degree is the one that's most likely to be involved in modal mixture. So let's look at some examples here. We're in C major, and we could have this really nice progression of the 7 half diminished 7th chord going to 1. It would sound something like this. Right? All good. That we like the half diminished sound. But sometimes in life, you need a fully diminished sound. And so, if we look at the tenor part here, A natural, we could mix from the minor, from C minor, and bring in A flat. And that's going to take our half diminished chord and make it a fully diminished 7th. See what I mean? That's a deeper sound. Because sometimes, even when you're in major, you need that fully diminished sound. A half diminished, not quite enough. And so we can see that it's a little more dramatic, and it may cause us to change some voice leading, right? You can see here I've resolved my tritones because I was paying attention in theory too, but it didn't change the function of the chord. 7 still resolves to 1. It's a different color, but we have not changed the function. Let's look at another example. And this is probably the most typical modal mixture type thing that we could see, is to use a minor 4 chord in the major key. So if we're in G here, we could have this really nice motion from 4 down to 5, 1, 4, 6, 5, which would sound like this. Right? It's a great progression. We got our bass line going, do, la, sol, right? Everything good there. But if you wanted that to have a little bit more punch to it, you could mix in this E flat. We're borrowing E flat from G minor. And what scale degree is E flat in G minor? It's the 6th scale degree, right? It's lay, do, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, lay, right? We're mixing in lay. And instead of having this with only the major 4, we could have the minor 4 as well. See how much more rich that is? This is a kind of color and a kind of sound that we've not been able to access in major keys up to this point. Having that modal mixture is really great because we keep the function the same, right? Minor 4/6 still wants to go to 5. There's nothing changes about that. 4 wants to go to 5. But here, instead of just going major 4 to 5, we've got this beautiful little minor addition there that just really gives it such warmth. And you can see down here that we just rewrite it as a minor chord. This is where, you know, it's so critical that we have our spelling right for the quality of the chord to show this is the major 4, the one we would expect in G major, and here's the minor 4. And again, C minor, C, E flat, G, that's a chord that we would use readily and very conveniently and comfortably in the key of G minor. So it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. We're just borrowing it into the major key. All right, let's look at one last sort of situation here, which is the little bit farther afield here. And we're going to look at some modally mixed, some borrowed chords here in which there are 2 accidentals that are being changed. Now, these are, you know, since more notes are coming from outside of our expected key, they're going to sound a little bit more dramatic. And so they come with some extra things. And one of the things that really makes them extra unique and extra colorful is that most commonly when we're adjusting 2 accidentals, it means that we are going to borrow the root of the chord from the parallel key. So it's not just the 3rd or the 7th like we saw in the last examples that can just sort of sneak in there. These chords are going to be more dramatically changed. And so what we're going to see is in our labeling, if we do see these, we're going to label them by saying flat 6 or flat 3 because we want to designate that the root of the chord is being altered, okay? So it's not just that you have to label it as major or minor, you have to show that the root has been labeled because we've already got a 6 chord. This is showing this isn't just a 6 chord, it's a flat 6 chord. So let's look at an example here and just to see the very distinct color that this can give us. So we're in A major, and we're going to look at a little deceptive cadence here. So we're going 1, 4, 5, 6. This is the deceptive motion that we would expect in A major. Right, there's our minor 6 chord, and we like that. That's awesome. We expected it to resolve, but instead it goes to that 6 chord. That's awesome. We love that. But let's do it with modal mixture here. So instead of going to 6, we're going to go to flat 6. Whoa. That's a world of difference, right? That's such a rich change. And the fact that the root is altered, right? Because we've got F here, F natural, which is not the kind of F we would expect in A major, right? You can see the F sharp here. But is F natural, or even is this entire chord, this F major chord, is that really so foreign from A? No, not really, because we would have an F major chord as the 6th chord in A minor. We're borrowing from the parallel minor. And so F major may seem like it doesn't fit in A major. It sounds awesome, though. Isn't that such a great sound? But if we were in A minor, that 6th chord, that major 6th chord on F natural would be really expected. And so here you can see we've adjusted the root F. And so even though it's F natural, we're calling it flat 6 because we're showing that it's lowered than what we would expect. But we've also got C natural, which is what scale degree? It's the 3rd scale degree. So in this chord, we've got 2 notes that are being borrowed from A minor into A major. And you can hear that that's such a rich, powerful sound. Again, that flat 6 resolution, right? That should be a very familiar sound for us. This is really common in film music. You can hear it's so lush, it's so warm. It's such an inviting sound. So that's modal mixture. We're going to continue and look at what it would do if we were mixing the other way, if we're in minor and we mix from major. But again, especially in a major key, but pretty much all the time, the 6th scale degree is by far your most likely culprit. And the big key is that we're not changing the function. It's the color that's being borrowed and shifted. Cool. More on that as we go.